So, in keeping with the fact that I've been talking to you about absolute sex and matters pertaining to absolute sex, today I'm going to talk to you about absolute sex and acquisition. Now, how does one acquire absolute sex? So, one does not acquire absolute sex. If we go back to the garden is a place owned by someone. It's implied in the word garden that there is an owner, okay? Because in a garden, shrubs, plants are pruned and kept for some purpose, okay? If it was filled with plants not being kept for a purpose, it would be called wild and it wouldn't be a garden, right? So the fruit that is in a garden is there for a purpose, okay? So one does not go into someone else's garden and just start eating, right? So if you are welcomed into the garden, okay, and are allowed to peruse the garden, hey, go check out everything in my garden. I've been keeping this garden. You're welcome to walk around. But don't eat the fruit. That is a statement said by an owner who has a mind about what's going to happen to the fruit that he has raised in his garden. But what does this really speak about? This really speaks about the owner of blood lineage. The owner of blood lineage. Yeah, you know we're talking about absolute sex, but the attitude that we're talking about, the one we have to really discuss in order to get to matters of proper acquisition of absolute sex. The owner wants to have a good family and wants to have a good blood lineage. In fact, when we talk about the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life or the New Jerusalem at the end of the Bible, so at the very beginning of the Bible and the very end of the Bible, God is coming back to the ideal and the perfection sought in the beginning, Alpha and Omega, so it will be in the end as it was in the beginning, right? Blessed are those that wash their robes, that they may enter the city by the gate and have right to the tree of life. Okay, who's outside the city in the last page of the Bible? Whoremongers, liars, sinners, okay, they're outside. There's an inside and an outside of the city. So there is sex that qualifies as absolute sex, and then there's lawlessness, okay? But one does not acquire absolute sex. One comes into a situation where they can enjoy absolute sex through limited means, okay? That is in the word, implied in the word, garden, okay? So a gardener was there. A gardener stood as owner. A gardener gave initial purpose to the crops and or shrubs and things growing in the garden. We, as his children, are his most prized thing that was growing in his garden. That principle, that heart, that reality is felt by us. In fact, when we become parents, we become avatars of God. We resonate with God's hope for our children and can understand the heart of God through our own parentism. And parentism is not something you can experience without the propagation of lineage, because children are an expression of your genetic code and your behavioral codes, okay? And or that is to say, physical and spiritual lineage, okay? Your school of thought is inherited by your children, and the same would be with God. And the joy that they resemble you is a part of the sweetness of the fruit of having children. And how are children made? Through sex. So everything related to having children, grandchildren, and descendants is connected to and only brought about through sex. Therefore, if we find children, descendants, our school of thought being propagated like genetic information as something, if we find it to be something serious and something valuable, invaluable really, then we know that sex, absolute sex, the original concept, it's not a game, right? Because it's connected to things that are not funny. These are very serious things to the human heart, to the heart of parent. Okay. So do you go in somebody's garden because you think their daughter is cute and just pick up their genetic material, i.e. their daughter's vagina? Or do you think that somebody else's son is cute and go and just pick up their genetic material without their say-so, meaning start messing around with their son's penis. No, you don't. So one does not acquire absolute sex through these means. In other words, one does not acquire absolute sex through mere consenting adults of the man and woman participating in the sex act. Absolute sex is acquired when the owners of the tree of life, that means the blood lineage of God, that means God and the people that have become those avatars of God, that means children of God who are grown and have children themselves. It is part of family business that the matter of giving husbands to your daughters and wives to your sons is one of the most serious things that happens in a true family, in God's concept of family, in God's actual family. Like, he's the first generation of that family, and your parents were the fourth generation, so you're the fifth, or your parents were the 11th generation, so you're the 12th. But you are a branch member on that same tree, with genetic material from the origin propagated down to you, and the same school of thought taught from generation to generation to generation. School of thought about love in different ways to consider the most important things in life. Okay, so if you can't just walk in the garden and just pick fruit off the tree, how would you acquire absolute sex? Well, your parents are involved in giving you your spouse. They are involved in working out together with you the destiny of your genetic material, Now, this may sound weird. We do have arranged marriages in the world. Sometimes these arranged marriages are for protection of family wealth or protection of family status. Now, we're talking about the Garden of Eden. You would have an arranged marriage, not for the sake of wealth or the protection of family status, and but for happiness, and not mere happiness. Happiness is protected through certain principles, the original principles that God, the original morality that God had in mind for humans. So you would be a full avatar of God if you were the agent passing full knowledge and responsibility for these love principles to your children. And that is how God shares himself, his very position, his very everything, even the privilege to make the most important creature ever made, humans, with humans. So we get into a conversation with this child and settle on matches, romantic relations are started based on these arrangements. And so when you come upon, like I did, a life where I live my life with a spouse, have sex with my spouse, bear children with my spouse, that very joyful reality and privilege, rite of passage and chief affirmation came to me not through mere consenting adults, came to me not just by a gift from my wife. No. My wife is a gift from her parents. And I am a gift to my wife from my parents. But behind my parents, if my parents are in lockstep with the original Garden of Eden concept of absolute sex that God feels, then my wife is a gift from God given to me through the owners on earth of that position. Okay? In other words, God, through our parents, are giving us the opportunity to enjoy sexual love and the raising, the bearing and the raising of children, the privilege and pleasure of raising and bearing children. We didn't steal it. We didn't walk into God's garden and decided to purpose things that he created for our own purposes. We came into agreement with God, our parents, who had come into agreement a generation earlier than us with God, and as a rite of passage, acquired this privilege. Now, stemming from properly acquiring absolute sex. Wait. Who else is giving us? Okay, the community. A true community knows that the way children are raised has a bearing on the community. So when they think of you as mature and an asset for the community and responsible, they wouldn't mind that you make humans that they will have to, they're going to have to deal with your kids, right? So you don't want knuckleheads raising your kids. So when the community of elders also comes to your wedding and gives their affirmations to your wedding, that's an expression of the community expressing itself as stakeholders in your sex, in your sex. Okay, this is knowledgeable reality I'm talking about. This is not ignorant. This is like really dealing with the sociological reality of the act of making kids. Okay, and there are stakeholders. The last stakeholder I didn't mention, I mentioned the bride, the groom, the parents, even the greater community of elders. You know, but there's also your children who can't speak up for themselves. Your future children cannot speak up for themselves. They come later and they give you the affirmation that they're glad that they were cared for and born in this way. That is, if they are in a community that actually stands for it, they can understand that the care, that they were born in a garden instead of being born wild. Okay, that they were born in a garden. And then they can tell you, thank you for bearing me in a garden. I appreciate being born in a garden. All right, so all the stakeholders are present in this explanation. To reiterate, you get your spouse from, well, your spouse, but you get your spouse from their parents. You get the privilege to marry from your parents, and you get the thumbs up from the larger community at your wedding. And you eventually, when your children are grown and come into consciousness, you get an affirmation for bearing them in a garden as opposed to in the wild from your children for having thought this deeply before having created them. And that is how you fully acquire the joy of absolute sex. Now, stemming from this absolute sex joy is the liberation talked about in the New Testament. It says, we love because he first loved us. The original primal love that God wanted human beings to base their beauty and their love actions upon is not Jesus dying for them. In the Garden of Eden, had there been no fall, and this is a revelation from Reverend Moon, had there been no fall, the prime love of the kingdom of heaven would be the giving of Adam to Eve and Eve to Adam so that they could eat the fruit in his presence with his permission. And then every generation would be saying, I can love my enemy, or I can love difficult people. Yes, there would be difficult people and difficult relationships in the kingdom of heaven on earth. I can be loving, I can be forgiving. I can give and forget. I can forgive and forget because I am the recipient of something that's invaluable. Okay? Now, in the New Testament, Jesus' dead body on the cross serves as that symbol of how much God loves you. But that is not the original Garden of Eden symbol of God's love. It is the giving of son to daughter, daughter to son, like I said. And that is why you must not take that which should be given. Because if you wait for it to be given, it can hold much more significance to you. It can light the corridors of your heart much more deeply than mere consenting adults. To see my spouse as a gift from God, we have Mars and Venus in my house. We have Mars and Venus. But I always fall back on the fact that even if she doesn't remember why our relationship got started, I remember that she is a gift from God and that she was a gift from my spiritual parents, who actually became my physical parents. And that to be able to bear children within the garden is a privilege that I didn't deserve. And no matter how crazy I think she might be on some extremely emotional day, she is a treasure. She is a treasure because she is a living gift. She is a living gift. So I hope you understand that the matter of acquisition in absolute sex is extremely important. Without dwelling on this, pondering this, we're apt to follow what's going on in this world, this whole mere consenting adults mode, and it is the mode of thieves. And thieves cannot, okay? When the Bible says, blessed are those that wash their robes, that they may have a right to the tree of life and enter the city by the gate. Mere consenting adults without consulting stakeholders and the owner of the garden is like trying to get into the city by climbing over the wall without the say-so of the dweller of the city inviting you in. I could talk about the tree of life depicted in the New Jerusalem and why that's all actually about absolute sex. But that's for another video. But there's a difference between people who try to climb over the wall and people who can enter by the gate. Okay? There's a gatekeeper in a gate. And there's an owner in the garden. And so the ceremony and moment of being given your spouse is significant to psychological health, a love that you receive from your spouse, through your spouse, even despite your spouse. And all of that is possible because of this tradition through which we acquire absolute sex.